Pageant wagons. What are they, and where did they come from? My name is Allyson Buckley, and today we will be discussing the medieval contraption and discover how it all works. Pageant wagons, like the name suggests, are wagons. They have 4 wheels and were most likely made out of wood or whatever material was available at the time, and they were used in terms of processional staging of medieval cycle plays. These wagons were also typically 8 feet wide and about 10 to 14 feet long. We will dive into the logistics of how these wagons were used during a show, as well as what these shows were. Pageant wagons first popped up in the 14th century and remained popular until the 16th century. Lots of information is unknown about who exactly developed the wagon, but it is highly speculated amongst scholars that trade guilds in Old England developed a form of mobile performances that would take place around town. The weather in the spring and summertime was actually quite nice, and the theater made a transition to the outdoors about 2 centuries prior. During these seasons, the trade guilds would construct small platforms and place them throughout their town. They would perform in intervals before moving to the next platform. They would load up their wagons with the props, actors, and scenery, which was called mansions, and pull these up to platforms and perform in intervals before moving to the next location. As Marvin Carlson points out in Places of Performance, the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance constitute the major historical period when theater existed as an important part of urban life without any specific architectural element being devoted to its exclusive use. Again, there is a lot of speculation among scholars as to the specifics behind the pageant wagons, and this is largely due to the fact that there are no extant wagons from this time period. Scholars have had to infer most information about these wagons from the cycle plays that were performed on them, as well as pre-existing information that historians and scholars know about life between the 14th and 16th centuries in Old England. This quote by Marvin Carlson actually demonstrates the idea of how important theater was, still is in England, as well as illustrating and introducing the idea of performance outside of the physical theater building. Ralph Blasting adds, "In contrast to our theater buildings, which by their very architecture define the actor's relationship to the audience and restrict the symbolism of the place, medieval performances occurred outdoors in the streets, markets, and other public areas. The defining characteristic of these performances is the interplay between the locus, the wagon or performed stage defined as a specific location, and the platea, the undefined space around the stage." To further understand the pageant wagon, we must go back into the 9th and 10th century when performance made its way into the church. The Dark Ages had just ended, and the church was one of the main influences on the English people. Theater had been enduring mainly through pagan rites, which is a form of rituals, something of which the church did not approve, mainly because it was not the church itself. It threatened the church, therefore they simply did not like it. To combat the popularity of such, as well as hoping to make Mass more understandable to those who don't speak Latin, all masses were in all Latin, so if you didn't know the language, you weren't going to understand. Dramatic interludes were added. These interludes were called tropes, after the Latin tropus, meaning added melody. These interludes debuted on Easter morning sometime during the 9th and 10th century, and it debuted during the introductory portion of Mass. So when outdoor theater gained popularity within the 13th century, the church actually had no specific involvement. So although there was no involvement, the plays that were performed outdoors with the pageant wagons were largely biblical. These plays were often called mystery plays or cycle plays, and these plays told individual stories of the Bible from the creation to the second coming. Now each little play in and of itself were complete, but they all joined as part of a larger religious story. And these shows were run by trade guilds that worked in accordance with city officials. Eventually, mystery plays grew in complexity and popularity, causing the guilds to take up a new method called a Cornish round. Now, what is a Cornish round, you might be asking? platforms were moved from the various points throughout town into a local field where they were arranged within a circle. Now, on the inside of the circle is where the audience would sit, where the pageant wagons would roll up on the outside. When they would roll up on the outside, they would unload and they would basically perform their show. And once they performed, it was an easy pack up and they could pull away, allowing another wagon and another show to pull in. So these styles of plays were most popular in York, Chester, Wakefield, and Coventry. There is about 25 to 50 extant plays from each cycle, depending on which one you're looking at. And this is what is studied to determine the specifics behind the pageant wagons. Ralph Blasting came to his own conclusion upon examining different extant mystery plays and the relationship between what the audience knows has happened in the play and how it is done so. This is demonstrated by the use or the possible lack of use of the stage and the street, the locus and the platea. Of Oklahoma Christian University argues that these mystery shows did not completely take place on the platform or the pageant wagon. She states that there had to be a need for more room, as well as the mere definitions of the locus and platea are sufficient evidence that the medieval staging also occurred in the audience. So basically that means that it wasn't just set on the platform in the wagon, it ventured out into the audience and the actors would go and use more space that way. However, time and speed provide an equally practical argument against the street as a space for performance. However, Kami Egan also states that even though time and speed do affect this, sight lines and being able to physically hear the actors was not much of a concern due to the close proximity between the audience and the actors. Pageant wagons may not seem as if they have influenced much of how we put on theater productions today. A majority of what we do nowadays is still indoors. It's, stationary. It's not a traveling production unless you're thinking about like the Broadway tours and things like that. However, that couldn't be further from the truth. Many high schools and colleges around the United States take part in regional, sometimes state or nationwide competitions and festivals, and these festivals basically run very similarly to mystery plays, meaning that these schools would prepare a short play, and when it was time, they would load up their van, their bus, their car, with the set, the props, everything needed, drive to the agreed upon location where they would have 5 minutes before their show to set up the set, and 5 minutes after to take it down when they were finished, and then they would continue to watch other schools' productions of shows, and it was very go, 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 one right after the other. Just like how it would be at a Cornish round or on the platforms throughout town with the pageant wagons. So an outdoor theater actually has also been making a large comeback lately. This is mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as a need for productions to meet public safety guidelines. Restrictions on the amount of audience members, as well as major limitations on the cast, can make it nearly impossible to accommodate shows indoors. So in the spring and summertime of 2020 and 2021, more and more local shows made the decision to move outside in hopes of perpetuating some sort of feeling of normalcy within the theater community. I personally found myself taking part in regional festivals as well as outdoor theater as part of my journey into theater education. And that's honestly what drew me to this topic and what really made me want to talk about it. Most sources I found on this topic predate the coronavirus, meaning that such importances were never mentioned. It feels like this virus has truly left nothing untouched, since it managed to affect nearly everything, including the use of medieval vehicles in theater. I genuinely find that fact to be the most interesting of all. Thank you so much for watching my video. My name is Allyson Buckley, and I will see you next time.